You set your alarm for 5:30 this morning. You skipped the weekend. You picked up the extra shift. You told yourself this is temporary, that if you just push a little harder, a little longer, the math will finally start working in your favor. And you have been telling yourself that for years. Here is what nobody has told you. The math was never going to work. Not because you are not working hard enough, but because hard work, the specific behavior you were taught to worship, was engineered to serve someone else's financial interests, not yours. And the people who engineered it knew exactly what they were doing. Between 1979 and 2020, American worker productivity grew by nearly 62%. Real wages for the average worker grew by less than 18% over that same period. That gap, the difference between what you produce and what you are paid, did not appear by accident. It was extracted. And the mechanism that kept you producing more while accepting less was the story you were told about hard work being the path to prosperity. This video is not about working smarter versus working harder. This is about the specific way the hard work mythology was manufactured, who manufactured it, and why your belief in it is worth more to certain people than anything you will ever produce with your hands or your hours. Okay. Let's start with the math that your employer understands but never explains to you. In America right now, the bottom 50% of households by wealth hold approximately 2.5% of total national wealth. The top 1% holds roughly 30%. If you assume this gap exists because wealthy people work more hours than everyone else, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has something to tell you. Lower income Americans on average work more hours than higher income Americans. The people with the least wealth are working the most. This is not a coincidence. It is a design feature. Think about it like a pickup basketball game where every point your team scores counts as 1, but every point the other team scores automatically counts as 3, because that is written into the rules of the court you are playing on. Nobody told you this when you signed up. The other team knows. Your coach, who works for the other team's ownership group, tells you to hustle more. You play harder than you have ever played. You score more points than you ever have before. You still lose by a wider margin every single season, and eventually you blame your free throw percentage. The points are wages. The automatic multiplier is compounding capital. The rules of the court are the tax code. And here is where it gets specific and undeniable. In America today, long-term capital gains profit made from selling investments are taxed at a federal maximum of 20%. Wages earned through labor are taxed at a federal maximum of 37%. The IRS literally charges you almost double for the money you earn through work compared to the money wealthy people earn through ownership. This is not a loophole. This is the intended architecture of the system. Someone lobbied very hard to write those numbers into law, and it was not you. Now here is the part that should make you angry, not the injustice of the tax code, the fact that you were taught to be proud of the behavior that the tax code penalizes. The cultural obsession with hard work as the path to wealth was not a natural American value that emerged organically from frontier spirit or Protestant ethics. It was a narrative that was deliberately promoted and distributed by industrial-era factory owners and later by mid-century corporations to solve a very specific problem. How do you keep workers working hard without paying them enough to achieve genuine economic independence? You have heard of Horatio Alger, the rags to riches stories, the self-made man who rises through virtue and effort. Between 1867 and 1899, Alger published over 100 novels, all telling essentially the same story, that hard work and moral virtue were the path from poverty to prosperity. These stories became the dominant American cultural narrative, and they became dominant during the Gilded Age, exactly the era when Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan were building monopolies that made genuine upward mobility structurally nearly impossible for workers. The myth of the self-made man exploded in popularity at the precise historical moment when becoming self-made through labor was becoming hardest. Think of it like a casino that puts enormous signs at the entrance, showing the 10 people who won jackpots. The signs are real, the winners are real. Every one of those stories is true, but the casino never shows you the statistical reality that for every one of those 10 people, 50,000 people walked out with less than they walked in with. The casino is not lying, it is curating. The hard work mythology is the same curation of real exceptions held up as the universal rule to keep everyone at the table. And here is what the competitor conversation about wealth and power always leaves out. The elite did not just create monopolies and capture regulatory agencies and control money creation. They also needed workers to keep working, productively, hopefully, without organizing. And so they funded the universities that teach economics without teaching power. They supported the media that celebrates entrepreneurship while never examining the structural barriers to it. They distributed the hustle culture that tells you the problem is your morning routine. Every motivational quote you have ever scrolled past about grinding and outworking everyone else is content that someone with power had a financial interest in you, believing not because it is always false, but because it functions as a pressure valve that channels your awareness of inequality into personal self-improvement instead of structural questioning. Okay, now we get to the argument that should change how you make every decision going forward. The most devastating effect of the hard work trap is not the money it fails to generate. It is the time and mental bandwidth it permanently consumes. Because genuine wealth building in America does not require secret knowledge or elite connections. It requires time. It requires the cognitive space to learn about index funds, to research legal structures, to build professional networks, to apply for better opportunities, to take calculated risks. And the 40, 50, 60-hour work week that American hustle culture celebrates as virtuous is precisely what eliminates access to all of those behaviors. It is like being told the cure for dehydration is running. Every time you feel thirsty, run harder. The running makes you need water more urgently while making it structurally harder to stop and drink. Hard work inside a system designed to extract your labor does not move you closer to wealth. It moves you further from the time and energy required to build it through the methods that actually work. Look at what Amazon built in its fulfillment centers. Workers whose output was tracked by the second. Algorithmic productivity thresholds that generated automated termination warnings without human manager review. Productivity records that were considered extraordinary in 2015 became termination-level underperformance by 2020. The harder workers pushed their bodies to meet targets, the more those targets were raised. The annual turnover rate approached 150%, meaning the average fulfillment center worker was replaced every 8 months. This is not one company being cruel. This is the purest visible model of what the hard work trap looks like when its mechanisms are stripped of their cultural packaging. Maximum effort, systematic extraction, no accumulation, replacement when depleted. And then there is the student loan architecture, the most sophisticated version of the trap ever built. Between 2006 and 2023, American student loan debt grew from approximately $500 billion to over $1.7 trillion. The people who took on that debt were told they were investing in their future through education and hard work, the most culturally approved form of effort in America. What they were actually doing was pre-committing decades of future labor earnings to financial institutions, making themselves structurally unable to take the economic risks that build real wealth, starting businesses, investing aggressively, relocating for opportunity during the exact years of their lives when those behaviors have the highest potential return. The student loan system did not accidentally trap a generation of hard workers. It was expanded through specific federal legislation, kept in place by lobbying that specifically prevented student debt from being dischargeable in bankruptcy, unlike almost every other form of consumer debt, and marketed by universities whose endowments invested in the same financial instruments. The path of hard work and education was real. The debt was the product they were actually buying. Here is the line I want you to sit with. The reason you are exhausted and still broke is not that you failed at hard work. It is that hard work was never the game being scored. You have been running a race that did not have a finish line by design, because a worker who is always running never has time to look up and ask who built the track. The system does not need you to fail. It needs you to keep trying. There is a profound difference between those two things. A system that needed you to fail would eventually produce revolt. A system that needs you to keep trying produces workers who blame themselves for their own exhaustion, who take on second jobs to solve problems created by the first job, who invest in personal development courses to fix what is actually a structural problem, and who, most importantly, never organize, never question, never look sideways at the person next to them and say, "Wait, we are all running this race. Why is the track shaped like this?" The competitor's conversation about wealth and power tells you the game is rigged and you are not invited. That is true, but it leaves out the most important part. Your participation in the decoy game, the hard work game, is not a side effect of the real game. It is the primary product of the real game. The elite do not simply exclude you from their game. They need you playing a different game so completely, so devotedly, so hopefully, that you never notice theirs. Okay. I am not going to tell you to stop working. That is not the point. The point is to change what you are working toward and what you are measuring. The first thing you can do right now is stop measuring your worth by hours logged and start measuring your decisions by whether they build ownership. Any hour you spend acquiring an asset, a skill with market leverage, an investment account, equity in a business, intellectual property compounds differently than an hour spent exchanging time for wages. The tax code confirms this. The compounding math confirms this. The only thing that does not confirm this is the culture you were raised in. The second thing is to start being honest about what the gig economy actually is. When Uber and DoorDash and Lyft spent over $200 million in California alone to pass Proposition 22 and keep workers classified as independent contractors, they did it because the difference between employee and contractor status is worth billions of dollars in avoided benefits and protections. The workers who drive hardest, deliver fastest, accept the most rides, are maximally productive for platforms that give them no ownership stake, no benefits, and no path to accumulation. Understanding this is not pessimism. It is the beginning of making different choices. The third thing, and this is the one the system most needs you not to do, is talk to the person next to you. Not about your personal hustle, about the structural math. Because the hard work mythology survives most effectively in isolation. It needs you to believe your situation is a personal problem with a personal solution. The moment you compare notes with someone who is working just as hard and falling just as far behind, the personal explanation starts to collapse. And what replaces it is the structural question. And the structural question is where everything gets interesting. You were not failed by your work ethic. You were handed a map that was drawn by people who needed you to end up somewhere specific. Knowing that does not change the territory overnight, but it changes what you are looking for. And that matters more than any extra shift you will ever pick up. Now, here is the question I have not answered yet, and it is the one that should stay with you. If hard work was engineered to keep you productive and non-threatening, then what does the system do when workers start to figure that out? What happens to the people who stop running and start asking who built the track? Because history has a very specific, very documented answer to that question, and it involves the deliberate targeting, co-option, and dismantling of every movement that ever got close to the truth. In the next video, we go into exactly how that suppression works, who funds it, and why the most dangerous thing you can do in America today is not work harder, it is organize smarter. Because the system has a detailed plan for your anger, and you need to know what it is before you walk into it. The system does not fear hard workers, it feeds on them, but it is absolutely terrified of informed ones.